The Mystery of the Eastern Rhodope, Trapezoidal Recesses, Episode 1, Part 2. Hello again, dear seekers of the unknown. I'm Eric Vasilev, and you've made it. You're now watching Part 2 of Episode 1 from our series, In the Footsteps of the Ancients, dedicated to the mysteries of the trapezoidal recesses in the Eastern Rhodopes. Here's a little secret. The topic is so vast, we're already working on Part 3. Thank you all for the feedback, comments, and suggestions you've shared with us. We even got a message from the infamous troll factory, allegedly run by the Great Northern State. We're deeply and truly touched. In the previous episode, we explored some of the common misconceptions. Now let's turn our full attention to the facts and dig deeper into the Eastern Rhodope trapezoidal recesses. Let's begin.
Top facts.
It is a fact that recent scientific studies conducted in the Eastern Rhodopes show that the trapezoidal recesses were carved into the rock over a very long span of time, most likely from the end of the Neolithic period to the very end of the Chalcolithic, roughly between the 5th and 3rd millennia BCE. This means the tradition of carving them spanned more than 2,000 years and involved many generations of people. The gradual improvement of their stoneworking skills can be traced by comparing different sites with trapezoidal recesses. Some of the oldest recesses are believed to be those carved into the rock formation known as the Arch above the Arda River. Here, in addition to the conventional shape familiar from other sites in the Eastern Rhodopes, we also find significantly larger and heavily weathered trapezoidal recesses, clear evidence of their much earlier origin. It is a fact that the trapezoidal recesses follow the valleys of the Arda and Harmanliska rivers in the Eastern Rhodopes, along with their smaller tributaries. They seem to mark the routes that prehistoric people may have used to access the mountain. At this point, you may be wondering, who were these prehistoric people? They were the descendants of the Anatolian farmers who began migrating towards the Balkans and Europe around 8,000 years ago, gradually colonizing nearly the entire continent. This was a complex process that involved interaction, adaptation, and mutual influence between the incoming farming communities and the local hunter-gatherer societies. It is a fact that a large portion of the ceramic fragments found in the context of trapezoidal recesses date back to the Chalcolithic. The recesses themselves are always part of a broader setting associated with monuments of that same era, such as the so-called Sharaptashi rock basins, mining sites, and caves, all of which were actively used during the Chalcolithic. It is a fact that the interiors of the trapezoidal recesses were polished using flint and stone implements, as well as tools made of bone, a technique never employed by the ancient Thracians. The polishing was done to remove any roughness inside the recesses that might cause water to accumulate, which would have quickly damaged the trapezoidal carvings. In order to protect the recesses from water erosion, in many cases grooves were cut into the rock to channel away rainwater. All completed recesses have a polished inner surface, evidence that the community wanted to preserve them and ensure their endurance over a long period of time. In most cases, The base of the recess was made at a slight incline, most likely to prevent water from accumulating inside. This way, any liquid that entered could flow out, keeping the recess protected from water erosion. Often, the polished surface extends deeper into the rock in order to create a kind of overhang above the recesses, along with the necessary slope that channels away any water collecting inside. This can be clearly observed at the site near the village of Neofit-Bozveljevo. It is a fact that among the documented recesses, quite a number have been found unfinished. This allows us to trace the very technology of their creation. At first, the prehistoric stonecutter would carve a trapezoidal frame, marking the shape and dimensions of the recess. Then, the recess itself was cut from top to bottom. The process began by shaping the upper part of the trapezoidal frame to the desired depth in the rock's surface, and only after that did the carving continue downward to the bottom of the frame. Before a trapezoidal recess was carved into a given rock, its surface was carefully prepared. In practice, this meant removing a layer of rock from the surface and creating a small overhang above the spot where the recess was to be cut, if the rock itself did not already provide a natural shelter. Here you can clearly see, in this monolithic rock near the village of Dolna Kula, the shaping of two overhangs that were made specifically to protect the carved trapezoidal recesses. It is a fact that the conventional dimensions of the recesses are as follows. Height, usually between 50 and 100 centimeters, though some reach up to 150. Width at the base, generally between 20 and 50 centimeters, and depth, around 20 to 30 centimeters, although deeper examples also exist. Professor Ruslan Kostov, who has attempted to establish the average proportions of the trapezoidal opening, notes that if one draws the diagonals of the trapezoid, they form two isosceles triangles with angles of 72 degrees at the base. Such triangles are known to embody proportions related to the golden ratio. This suggests that prehistoric people possessed advanced knowledge of mathematics and geometry. Professor Kostov suggests a possible connection with calendrical and seasonal cycles, patterns that were of vital importance to prehistoric communities, since the economy of this farming society depended on precise knowledge of the calendar, which determined the gathering and sowing of crops. These cycles were linked to the movements of specific celestial bodies, such as the sun, the moon, and others. For example, the pole star, which in earlier epochs was Kochab in the constellation Ursa Minor. According to Professor Kostov, this northward orientation may have been of great significance for prehistoric communities. It is a fact that the shape, dimensions, and style of carving of the trapezoidal recesses are almost identical. This suggests that their creation was carried out by a group of people, likely specialized in this activity. It is also a fact that one of the great mysteries remains the carving of trapezoidal recesses into sheer, often inaccessible cliffs. It seems unlikely that wooden scaffolding was used during their construction, since the tree species available in the eastern Rhodopes could not provide material strong enough to build tall scaffolds that could be secured at such heights. A step towards solving the mystery of how the trapezoidal recesses were carved was made in 2015. The project Light and Cult, together with engineer Milush Blagoev, carried out a 3D scan of the site Shahan Kaya near the village of Sladkodum. The research was part of a wider study on the recesses, and the results were published in 2016 by Bulgarian scholar Professor Ruslan Kostov. During the preparatory work, the project team discovered several stone rings cut into the western surface of Shahan Kaya. These are believed to have been used for fastening certain structures, most likely seats tied with ropes, by means of which the prehistoric stonemasons could secure themselves while carving the trapezoidal recesses. Since most of the cliffs with recesses have an overhanging slope, the carving could not have been achieved simply by rappelling down. However, the use of some form of auxiliary seat-like device anchored with ropes into these stone rings seems a plausible method. It is a fact that there is no fixed pattern or configuration followed by the stonemasons who carved the recesses. They are positioned in a wide variety of places on the rock surfaces. Sometimes they appear in groups or arranged in rows, but just as often we find isolated units carved into cracks and fissures in the rock, a technique that remains an absolute mystery to scholars. One of the best preserved and most skillfully carved trapezoidal recesses is found in the rock fissure above the entrance to the cave known as Goyuk Inn. Through this fissure, the rays of the setting sun also shine. Bulgarian scholar Associate Professor Stefanka Ivanova suggests that the recesses may have served as a kind of sign, indicating pathways through the mountains or marking deposits of copper ore, gold, and other valuable minerals. All activities related to the extraction and processing of metals, as well as astronomical observations, were most likely imbued with deep religious significance and accompanied by complex ritual practices. These were probably carried out by a restricted group of initiated individuals who organized production, guided the religious life of the community, and observed the changes in the movement of celestial bodies. It is a fact that the trapezoidal recesses were carved into the rocks in such a way that they could be seen from afar. The hypothesis of a purely practical function in prehistoric times as markers of ore deposits is suggested by Associate Professor Stefanka Ivanova, who links it to the fact that mining itself was considered a sacred activity. Prehistoric miners were capable of opening mines, extracting ore, and smelting it. Finds from prehistoric sites on the territory of Bulgaria prove that people of the Chalcolithic period used relatively complex pictograms, which some scholars interpret as the earliest form of proto-writing, although this claim is often the subject of speculation, especially in the Balkans. Professor Ruslan Kostov has also put forward a purely semantic hypothesis regarding the trapezoidal recesses. Their shape corresponds to that of certain tools widely used during the Neolithic, Chalcolithic, and early Bronze Age, such as axes and chisels. He points out that this shape was achieved through centuries of practical experience, and it is not unlikely that it was sacralized in certain regions of the world with long-standing mining traditions or other specialized crafts. Examples of this kind are known from prehistoric archaeological sites in Brittany, France, where wall paintings depicting stone axes have been discovered. The walls of the Gavrinis passage tomb are richly decorated. 23 of its 29 upright stone slabs bear engravings showing motifs such as axes, bows and arrows, spirals, concentric circles, zigzags, and horn-like symbols. Its exceptional preservation and intricate decorations make it one of the world's major treasures of prehistoric art, offering key insight into ritual burial practices and symbolic expression in early farming societies. It is a fact that trapezoidal recesses have also been found inside certain caves in the eastern Rhodopes. Because of their womb-like shape, according to some scholars, it is often speculated that these places were dedicated to a cult of the Great Mother Goddess. However, based on the available archaeological finds, it is very difficult to confirm specific cult practices connected with the so-called Great Mother Goddess. There are, nonetheless, numerous hypotheses that openly exploit this assumption. Other interpretations link the trapezoidal form with the religious beliefs of prehistoric people. One suggestion is that they viewed the recesses as gateways to the afterlife, through which the spirit would return to the sacred ancestors. Yet this idea, too, is difficult to substantiate with concrete evidence. An absolute mystery for scholars are the enormous anthropomorphic, ornithomorphic, and zoomorphic rock images that so often accompany the cliffs marked with trapezoidal recesses. These so-called rock phenomena have not yet been the subject of serious scientific research. At some of the large cult complexes, we also find caves shaped like wombs, rock-cut stairways, Sharapan basins, and platforms carved into inaccessible cliffs, from which there are panoramic views of the rising or setting sun. This strongly supports the assumption that prehistoric people understood calendrical cycles and used a calendar based on the observation of celestial bodies. For the most part, the rock carvings were made with flint and stone tools, evidence that these sites first appeared in prehistoric times, during the Stone and Chalcolithic ages. It was in these periods that the foundations of the earliest farming and craft communities were laid, communities that began to transform the natural landscape. They were the descendants of the first farmers who had earlier moved from Anatolia into the Balkans and gradually colonized Europe after the Neolithic. They possessed remarkable knowledge of astronomy, as well as metal extraction and processing. This earliest human civilization is known in scholarly literature as Old European Civilization, or the Danube Civilization, a name first introduced by the American archaeologist of Lithuanian heritage, Professor Maria Gimbutas. Through her extensive studies of the prehistoric cultures of Europe, which after the 5th millennium BC, in her view, formed this so-called Old European civilization, Gimbutas caused a sensation in archaeological science during the 1970s and 1980s. According to Gimbutas, the prehistoric communities inhabiting the present-day Bulgarian lands were also part of this Danube civilization. Over the years, many Bulgarian archaeologists have actively contributed to its study, including Professor Henrietta Todorova, Professor Vasil Nikolov, Ivan Ivanov, Stefan Chohadjev, Mikhail Chohadjev, Ventsislav Gergov, Bistra Koleva, and many others. And as we near the end of today's episode, we'd like to show you a very curious find. During excavations at the prehistoric temple complex near the village of Dolnoslav, Bulgarian scholar Professor Raduncheva discovered a clay artifact which, according to her, represents a model of a trapezoidal recess. As you can see, the resemblance is striking, but perhaps its study and its connection to the trapezoidal recesses is still ahead of us, if the artifact is indeed preserved. The complex itself dates to the second half of the 4th millennium BCE, time when the cultural development of the prehistoric communities in the Bulgarian lands, part of the civilization of Old Europe, reached its peak. Although archaeologists have been aware of the trapezoidal recesses and the prehistoric cult complexes of the Eastern Rhodopes for more than 100 years, they remain very poorly studied. Only systematic, long-term, interdisciplinary research can lift the heavy veil of mystery surrounding this prehistoric heritage of Bulgaria. Until that happens, non-scientific speculations will no doubt continue to live their own active life until the time comes for true scientific inquiry. That's all from us for today. The topic of the Eastern Rhodope trapezoidal recesses remains open, and we will continue our efforts to expand it and create new content around it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel in the footsteps of the ancients and click the notification bell to stay updated with our latest videos. We hope you found this episode interesting. Be sure to leave us a comment if you'd like to share your thoughts, or if you'd like to see more content like this. See you next time, here on In the Footsteps of the Ancients.